Good morning, fourth grade. For the last few weeks, you have been studying several things about animals in your writing and science unit. You've learned about animal habitats, dietary needs, adaptations, and animal reproduction. Now that the unit is coming to an end, it's time to wrap it up with a pretty little bow. You are going to teach me something. During this research project, there are several standards that we will touch on. You'll find, evaluate, and select appropriate sources to answer questions, seek appropriate help when needed, use information technology responsible, and conduct a short research project that builds knowledge through investigation of different aspects of a topic. There's more standards here for you to look at later. So the most important question is, what do you need to do? You are going to choose an animal. And by choose an animal, I mean choose a specific animal. If you pick a fox, you need to identify what kind of fox, such as an Arctic fox or a red fox. The reason why your teacher and I are having you do this is because both of those animals are foxes, but they live in different regions. So the information you find on them will be different. You will find information on an animal habitat, their diet, their adaptation, and animal reproduction. Your teacher has provided a list of websites that you can use on this assignment. Do not fear though if your animal is not on these websites. I'm going to help you determine what other websites you can use. There are a few questions that we will ask about each website. Is the information accurate? This means if I'm researching killer whales and I come across an article that talks about killer whales being purple and living on land, I know this is not accurate, so I'll probably discard that article and won't read too much more into it. But if I find an article that says killer whales are also referred to as orcas, I take that information and do more thorough search into the article because I know that information is correct, but just because one thing in it's correct doesn't mean all of it's correct. So my next step would be to look at the author and the source. Is it credible? Do they have background information in animal research? And is it reliable? So, to do this, you can look at the author's name. Sometimes if you click on it, it'll take you to a biography at the end of the page, or you can highlight the name and Google it. After determining whether or not the source and the author is credible, you look at the article again to see if it's biased. You may have already determined if it has a bias by reading the title or when you looked at it the first time. It is important to find out if it has a bias because if it's a bias, it's trying to persuade you into believing one certain way. It has an opinion. And if it has an opinion, it's only telling you half of the story. So if you do have one that's biased, you can still use the information, but you'll have to use other sources to back up that source. And is it relevant? If I'm doing an article on killer whales, I probably shouldn't be researching foxes. And if I'm doing a research on killer whales and I find an article and I'm researching the habitats of killer whales and I find an article about hobbies of killer whales, I might put that to the side so I can read later, but it's not relevant at that moment. When was the article posted and what was the date? Information is changing all the time, so use the 5-year mark. If the article has been made within the last 5 years, it should be pretty much up to date. 1 or 2 articles might be wrong depending on what animal you choose, but 5 years is pretty good. If it's 20 years ago, you'd have to use more up-to-date articles to confirm your other articles. So make sure it's within the 5-7 years. Also, is the information in your article backed up with other sources or links? Sometimes your article will have words that are underlined. Click on the word, see if it takes you to a link or if it takes you to an ad. Also, they'll have sometimes works cited at the bottom, just like how you cite your sources that you use in your articles. The website does that as well to determine whether or not it is accurate and up to date. So let's look at 2 websites just to go through it together. I'm choosing to go through SeaWorld is one of mine in the animal information book. One reason why I wanted to do this one is because it also shows several animals, give you an idea to what animals you want to research. So we got a few listed there for you to look at. Since I've been talking about killer whales, I'm going to continue with this. Looking at this, I'm going to determine whether or not is going to help me just by glancing at it first. It gives me a bunch of things to look at, and I know several of them are on your list of things you have to research, such as reproduction, diet, adaptations. We're going to click on the habitats to look at that, to do the article. Alright, so we have a list just like the one that we just went through. The first thing we're going to look for is accuracy. So we're going to read some of this to see. Killer whales inhabit all oceans of the world. Alright, that sounds reasonable. Looking at a few others. Rarely, killer whales have been seen in freshwater rivers around the world. So there's nowhere in here that's telling me that killer whales are orange. So I'm going to say that the information is accurate. I'm going to go to credibility next. So I'm looking for an author's name. I don't have an author in this article, but I know that SeaWorld does do research and that it's a pretty credible site. So I'm going to go with SeaWorld is a good site to use. Is it bias? So let's look at, we just looked and read some of it, but let's look again. See if anywhere in here is telling us an opinion, or if it's just stating facts. We want stuff that just states facts. So in some areas, seasonal movements of killer whales. So it talks about migration, but it doesn't tell us anything that's biased. So no bias, so we're good with that. Relevant. I know habitat is in our paper, so it is relevant, so we're good on that. Date. I did see that there was no date listed. However, I did see at the very bottom that right down here, they did upgrade their copyright in 2016, so within the last 3 months they've done it. I'd assume that they would update their articles, but that's not likely. Some people don't update their articles. I do know that SeaWorld is having more research done on their orcas, so I'm going to take that in the more recent commercials, that I've seen on TV to say this is accurate information and up to date. Is it backed up? I didn't see anywhere that they had either words highlighted to take me to a different link, or there were none at the bottom, so I have to say that in this article, the only people I have to back it up is SeaWorld themselves. So other than that, I would say this is a credible source to use. You could use this to put information in your research paper. Let's look at another article. So I have another one right here, Earth. Click on that, let it load for a minute. Why killer whales should not be kept in captivity. So right away you know that there's a bias. But let's keep looking in this article, because sometimes even if it's biased, it could have some information that we could use. We just might need to back it up. It is only one out of the several questions. So accuracy, let's see. For the last few years, there have been stories of captive orcas suffering several health problems. I see that being true. It talks about an orca that lives in SeaWorld in Florida. It has information from 2010. It has other information from 1991 and 1999, so it's a little outdated, but it looks like it's talking about documented orcas, so that's when they lived. The information's not telling me anything that's not true, but it is biased, so it's really focusing on orcas in captivity. We already went over its bias. Is it relevant? This site is not very relevant because it doesn't talk about habitat. It doesn't talk about dietary needs. It doesn't talk about anything else that you're going to have in your article. It talks about captivity, which is not an orca's natural habitat. So, probably not going to use this article for the research, but I would like to point out how this information was published March 10th. So considering it's March 11th it's March 13th right now, it is up-to-date information. And I wanted to show that in here, even though it's not talking about stuff that we're researching, it does have other links that back up its information. It does link us to SeaWorld, which we were just at, but to show that the information was in fact true, it does have several links. So it has that one, and then it has this one about one of the other people. So New York Times. And let's do one more just to look at it. Oh. So it takes us to several sources that do actually well, this one is not an informational one, but it did take us to several sources that did have information backing it up. So I would say that SeaWorld one was an alright one to use for the article, but this one is not because it doesn't meet very many of the questions that we had. Alright. This is the end of my PowerPoint/Zaption video. If you have any more questions, come ask me or your teacher. We would love to help you and point you in the correct direction. The things that you are going to research, I've said it several times, but I'll repeat them again. You are going to look at, pick a specific animal, such as penguin, or what kind of penguin, seals, elephants, African elephants, Asian elephants, and talk about their habitat, diet, adaptations, and animal reproduction.